Welcome, everyone. Great to see you all here. Going to get started in just a few minutes. Fabulous to see so many folks online and even before time. Got Southeast New Mexico in the house. Awesome. Welcome, Mickey. If anyone else wants to shout out where they're calling in from today, feel free to put that in the chat. We as rural economic developers, we probably love more than most people to know about your geographies and where you're from and how's the weather. Awesome. Oh my gosh, Jacksonville, Florida. I'm in St. Augustine, just down the road. Wow, tons of geographic diversity. We've got Emporia State and good old Kansas, Kirksville, Missouri, Woot Woot, Pennsylvania, Emporium, PA. Some of my family's from there, North Dakota, Central New York, Arkansas, North Carolina, Asheville, Ada. Wow, tons of great places. If I'm not shouting you out, I don't want to say them all now, but they're all welcome and awesome to see. Wonder if we'll get every state represented. Oh my gosh, Dublin, Ireland. Very cool. International. Tanzania. Sorry, I'm just loving this. Our Tanzania friend, hello and welcome. I've been to Zanzibar, actually. It was a phenomenal life experience a couple of years ago. Everywhere from Zanzibar to Ireland to Michigan to Colorado. What a cool group of people. I love that we're all here digitally. Power of the internet connecting us across geographies and oceans. Maybe we'll just wait one more minute and then we'll go ahead and dive in. So thank you all for your patience and for showing up and dialing in. Oh, super cool. Another Tanzania Zanzibar traveler. Chattanooga, good old Kentucky, Aberdeen. Hello, friends from South Dakota, Central Virginia. We love it. All right. Well, I think that is a fabulous representation. We might as well go ahead and dive in. So hi, everyone, and welcome. Just want to thank you all so much for joining us for our session today. From Vision to Action, is building a tech economy the right choice for your rural community? I'm Molly Pyle, Director of Tech-Based Economic Development here at the Center on Rural Innovation, or CORI. I'm joined today by my colleagues Nick Pools and Diego Rubio, who you'll be hearing from shortly. Now, we know that you're here today because you care about the future of your community, and you're curious about what role the tech economy can play in shaping it. Today, we'll walk you through why a tech-based approach is worth considering, how we support communities in exploring that path, and what it takes to get started. We are the Center on Rural Innovation, a national nonprofit who believes rural communities have enormous untapped potential. Our mission is to make sure that that potential isn't just recognized, it's activated. We do this by helping rural leaders build tech economies that reflect the strength and values of their regions, creating opportunities that empower rural people to thrive in the tech economy. Our support to rural leaders is comprehensive, and it's built to meet communities where they are. We help rural leaders develop and execute strategy, and an assessment is really the first part of that, informing how you want to build a local tech ecosystem and support entrepreneurs and workforce development. We also have the CORI Innovation Fund, where we invest directly in early stage rural tech startups, because we know access to capital is one of the biggest barriers that rural founders face, and our fund helps to close that gap. We have a dedicated research team as well, so that everything we do is grounded in data. We conduct original rural-specific research that helps communities understand trends, make the case for investment, and set priorities based on evidence, not guesswork. And we don't just provide services, we build local capacity. We bring communities into a peer network, we offer technical assistance, and we stay engaged for the long haul. And that is where it gets even more powerful. No community has to go it alone. The Rural Innovation Network is our invite-only community of other rural leaders doing this work. It's made up of about 40 rural communities across 25 states that are all actively building tech economies. And being part of this peer network means access to shared tools, real-time support, and maybe most importantly, learning from others who are right there with you, rolling up their sleeves and doing it, your real rural peers across the country. So communities trade insights, avoid reinventing the wheel, and can move faster together. Now, this is not a program you apply for, but a community of practice that you're invited into when you're ready to take action. And the momentum in this network is incredible. These are communities, again, just like yours, doing the work, asking the hard questions, and building local solutions that create real long-term opportunity. So here's how today is going to flow. First, we'll explore why a tech economy might be the right path. Then we'll talk about how to get started through our assessment process, which we will also share real stories from communities like yours, and we'll finish with plenty of time for Q&A. So let's begin with that big question. Why should rural communities consider building a tech economy in the first place? The truth is, over the past 40 years, economic growth has increasingly clustered in large metro areas, places with strong universities, dense networks, and major employers. Meanwhile, many rural communities have been left out of that growth, not because they lack potential, of course, but because the systems and investments fueling the knowledge economy often didn't reach them. This chart makes that story very clear. The blue line shows how employment in large metro areas has steadily grown since 1970. And the orange line, representing rural areas, has remained relatively flat. The opportunities created by the digital age have not been evenly distributed, and that's created long-term consequences. But the key point here is this. While the concentration of prosperity isn't inevitable, it's the result of choices. And rural communities can make different choices to shape a different future. And that growing gap we just saw, that uneven growth between metro and rural areas, as you all know, it has real consequences on the ground. You're feeling it, I'm sure. You're seeing it in your shrinking local economy, perhaps fewer job opportunities and industries that haven't diversified. We also see it across rural communities in talent leaving, brain drain, right, of young people, and a workforce that is aging without enough replacement. These challenges are symptoms of being left out of the knowledge economy, and they're interconnected. Fewer jobs means fewer people, which weakens civic institutions and makes it much harder to plan for the future. But this isn't about placing blame or belaboring the problem. It's just about naming it clearly so we can solve it strategically. Because when we understand what's driving these trends, we can design solutions that actually shift the trajectory. And that's the good news. Tech jobs and startups can help address these issues and have an outsized positive impact on rural economies. First, they grow fast. Computer occupations are projected to grow 3 times faster than the national average. It's a very strong signal of where opportunity is heading. They also multiply impact. For every high-tech job created, 3 to 5 additional local jobs are created in supporting industries, from service roles to logistics to professional services. And they pay more. Workers in highly digital jobs consistently earn higher wages than those in less tech-enabled roles. And that income can stay in the community and drive broader economic health. And here's one more powerful stat. According to the Kauffman Foundation, startups, or specifically firms less than 5 years old, create nearly all net new job growth in the US. So that means supporting entrepreneurs is not just good policy, it is essential for future job creation. And when rural communities invest in tech jobs and startups, they're planting seeds for that sustainable ripple effect growth. So how do you do that? How do you make it happen? It takes intentional investment. And it's important to note that we're talking about here it's not traditional economic development. This isn't about recruiting one big employer or hoping that factory that closed reopens. This is about building an ecosystem and intentionally creating the conditions where tech jobs and startups can take root and grow. So let's talk about how rural communities can practically enable more tech jobs and support startups. It starts with those physical spaces, places where innovation can happen. That could be co-working spaces, incubators, maker spaces, or local innovation hubs. These are spaces where entrepreneurs and learners gather, build, and collaborate. But infrastructure alone is not enough. Startups need support like accelerator programs, mentorship, business services, and space isn't enough. They need actual funding. They often lack access to these kinds of key resources, and that is a major barrier to seeing a wave of startups unleashed in your community. On the workforce side, training must be aligned with real demand. That means identifying in-demand tech roles and working with your local schools, colleges, and employers to build pathways into those jobs. We've seen communities connect major employers with newly trained tech workforce and tech talent to fill those gaps and retain those skills. STEM education at the K-12 level is also key. It plants the seed early and helps build that culture of innovation over time. So while the challenge we acknowledge is multi-layered, obviously so are the solutions, and they're very achievable with the right strategy and partnerships. What's different here is the focus. It's not top down, it's about activating what your community already has and filling those gaps strategically. It's a long game, but one with real lasting payoff. And that is ultimately what tech-based economic development, or TBED, is all about. It's a proven approach that supports local innovation, attracts investment, diversifies the economy, and keeps talent rooted in the community. Tech-based economic development is not about chasing Silicon Valley and accelerating gentrification. It's about building a local economy that reflects your community's strengths, values, and future. What makes TBED powerful is that it is not a one-size-fits-all model, but a flexible framework that helps you diversify your economy, attract investment, retain talent, and create high-quality jobs that rural community members can access. Communities that embrace TBED see more than just economic benefits. They see cultural shifts towards creativity, collaboration, and long-term thinking. They gain tools to future-proof their economies and reduce their vulnerability to automation or single industry dependency. It's also important to emphasize that TBED is not a silver bullet, but it's a strategic path forward for rural communities ready to invest in themselves and their people. And with the right foundation, it can be truly catalytic. So with that, my colleague Nick will take it over to share a little bit more.
All right, thanks, Molly, and hello, everyone. So we've talked a lot about the why rural communities like yours should consider building a tech economy. But now I want to shift gears and focus on the how, because it's one thing to be inspired, and it's another to know exactly where to begin. So the good news is there is a very clear first step, and that step is conducting a tech economy assessment. And this process is how we help communities move from "this sounds promising" to "here's how we're going to make it happen." It's a structured, research-informed approach to figuring out what's possible and really what needs to come next. So with that said, let's dive in and take a closer look at how this all works. So at CORI, like Molly said, we don't see tech-based economic development as a one-time project or a quick win. In fact, the approach we have is a three-phase journey, a structured, intentional path that helps rural communities build capacity, align stakeholders, and grow a tech economy in a way that really fits their own context. And that journey always starts with an assessment, which we'll look at in a bit more detail in just a bit, but this is the foundation. And it's grounded in real data, the local insights and evidence-based benchmarks. It helps us to answer a core question: where is your community today in relation to what's needed to build and sustain a tech economy? It's not a test. There's no grade. There's no pass or fail metric. It's about uncovering the starting line, which is something that many communities never truly define. So once we've established that starting point, we can then move into the second phase, which is strategy. And this is where we work together to build a roadmap that makes sense for your community. It includes clear goals, timelines, responsible partners, and action steps that connect your assets, your gaps, and your aspirations. We don't provide you with a generic playbook. Instead, we work with you to develop a co-created plan built around what's both possible and practical. And then comes the part that many communities are really most excited about, and that's the funding and activation, or the implementation stage. And this is where strategy turns into motion. We work with you to identify the right funding pathways, federal, state, local, philanthropic, to help craft compelling proposals that reflect the vision and the momentum gained during those first two phases. And this is also where pilot programs and early wins start to take shape, helping to build confidence and community buy-in. So yes, it's a methodical process, but also a very manageable one. You don't need to leap straight into building innovation hubs or launch accelerators tomorrow. You just need to be open to asking, where are we now and what might be possible if we took the next step? And that next step should always begin by conducting an assessment. So let's talk about that first step, the assessment itself. Why start here? Because for many communities, the challenge isn't a lack of motivation, it's a lack of clarity. It's clarity about what's already in place, what's missing, and clarity about what's actually possible given your size, geography, workforce, and local attributes. And that's exactly what this process delivers, giving your community a sharp, evidence-based look at whether tech economic development is a viable and valuable path for you to pursue. So it's not just about collecting data. It's about making meaning out of what already exists in your ecosystem and using that knowledge to make some informed decisions. The process also tends to surface things that were already in place, but maybe weren't being leveraged to their full potential. And sometimes communities discover that they're already further along than they thought. Other times they uncover barriers that help explain why any given process has stalled. But in either case, the insight gained becomes incredibly powerful. And if you've ever found yourself asking any of these questions, as I know some of you did when you registered for the webinar here, where do we even begin? How far behind are we? And does it make sense to pursue this? And who do we need to involve? How do we get everyone moving in the same direction? And this process is going to help to bring those answers into focus. So please understand that this is not a commitment to build a tech campus overnight, but instead a commitment to understand your position, your potential, and your path forward. And with that understanding in place, you're in a much stronger position to build strategy, to activate partners, and to pursue funding. So now let's look at exactly how the assessment unfolds. Okay, so CORI's assessment process is designed to be both structured and collaborative, typically unfolding over 8 to 12 weeks. We've refined it here into 4 clear phases that build on one another to create a complete picture of your community's tech economy landscape. We begin this with the kickoff phase, a logical place to start, which lasts around 1 to 2 weeks. And this is where we hit the ground running, mobilizing your local team and building a customized assessment plan. This includes identifying relevant comparable communities so we can see how yours stacks up against them, but also against your home state and the country as a whole. It's a foundational step, but it's also where we begin to establish trust and shared language and alignment around the goals of this process. We work closely with you to define what success looks like in your context, not in theory. Think of this kickoff phase as setting the GPS before you hit the road. Next, we move into data collection and benchmarking, which usually takes another 2 to 3 weeks. This is where the research begins in earnest. Our team maps your local tech economy assets across a consistent framework while gathering data from both local sources and national databases. We look at things like broadband coverage, community demographics, employment data, and so much more. But we also identify key local and regional partners, those who are already doing the work or should be involved going forward. So this phase gives us quantitative foundation we need to begin understanding what's possible, but also where challenges might lie. The third phase here is all about community engagement and validation of findings. And it's where the story really comes to life. So over the course of 2 to 3 weeks, we conduct interviews and conversations with your community members, educators, entrepreneurs, employers, civic leaders, other stakeholders. And these discussions help us pressure test our findings and ensure that the data reflects lived experience. It's where we go beyond spreadsheets to hear what people are seeing on the ground and how they're feeling about the local innovation landscape. This step is essential because a community can't move forward unless people feel seen and heard in the process. Let's face it, spreadsheets, they don't always capture the nuance of, we tried that in 2014 and it was a complete disaster, but it's still relevant though, nonetheless. And then finally, we reach the build recommendations phase, which typically takes about 2 to 4 weeks. And this is where we synthesize everything into a clear, actionable set of insights. The final deliverable is a polished presentation that lays out key findings, priority actions, and a set of strategic next steps. These aren't just generic ideas. They're tailored to your community's unique position, your challenges, and your goals. The outcome really is a document that you can actually use, whether you're developing a long-term strategy, preparing a grant application, or simply looking to align local stakeholders around a shared vision for growth. So from kickoff to final recommendations, this process is built to move your community from exploration to understanding, and then from understanding to action. So now that we've outlined the process, let's take a closer look at what we're actually measuring through this assessment. We benchmark your community across 8 key elements that they provide a comprehensive view of your readiness to build a tech economy. These are not abstract metrics. They're grounded in what we actually know matters when it comes to tech-driven growth. So we start here with community profile. This is about understanding what makes your place unique, your geographic context, your quality of life, cost of living, and other local characteristics that influence talent attraction and retention. We want to understand what draws people in, what keeps them there, but also what might be holding them back. So next we look at broadband, because in today's economy, digital access isn't a luxury, it's a prerequisite. We assess coverage, quality, speeds, reliability. Whether you're hoping to support remote workers or local startups or digital skilling programs, connectivity really is the bedrock. Then there's the innovation infrastructure. And this goes beyond just physical buildings. Yes, we all want to know about your existing or your plans to develop co-working spaces, fab labs, maker spaces, but we're also examining the programs, the partnerships, and the activities that bring those spaces to life. We're looking for places where people can collaborate and test new ideas and turn concepts into companies. Our fourth element is capacity. So here we find out who is or who will be driving this work locally. The backbone organization coordinating your community's tech ecosystem development. We want to know all about your clear champions with the authority and the energy to lead. But we'll also need to establish if your local leaders have the bandwidth and the strategy to take on something new. So then we shift to the talent pipeline. We explore whether your education and training systems are preparing residents for in-demand tech roles. And that includes traditional four-year colleges, community colleges, high schools, boot camps, and certification programs. We want to look at the alignment between local training offerings and real-world job opportunities. And closely related to that is access to tech jobs. It's one thing to train people, but it's another to ensure that there are jobs waiting for them. So we'll examine the availability of tech jobs locally, the engagement of regional employers, and the potential for remote employment. It's also where we consider whether local residents feel that tech is a viable path for them. The seventh element here is entrepreneurship support. And this is where we ask, is there an environment that encourages risk-taking and creativity and business building? Are there programs, mentors, events, spaces for founders? And are resources easy to find, or are they maybe scattered and siloed? And then finally here, we assess access to capital, because even the the very best idea in the world needs fuel to grow. We look at the availability of early stage funding. We look at access to state and federal programs, and whether local investors or at least connectors are part of the equation. Now, no community has all 8 elements perfectly in place. That's not the goal here. The goal is to understand where you're strong, where you have momentum, and where you need to dig in further. This benchmarking isn't just about diagnosing challenges, it's about discovering the starting points for transformation and for future strategic work. So what does the tech economy assessment actually produce? Well, in our experience, one of the most valuable outcomes, again, is simply clarity. Communities often come into this process with big ideas and strong motivation, but not always a shared understanding of where they are today or what's truly realistic in the short term. This process helps to surface those insights. You get a clearer view of your community's position across those 8 key elements that influence tech-driven growth. And you begin to see where strengths already exist, even if they haven't been activated yet, and where persistent gaps might be holding progress back. It also helps communities to move past assumptions. Sometimes a place discovers that it's further along than they expected, and other times the process brings to light some hard truths that can help explain why certain initiatives haven't taken hold. Either way, that knowledge can be very grounding. And perhaps the most important thing of all is an assessment can build shared language. It gives your local stakeholders a common reference point, something to talk from and not just about. And that makes everything that follows, whether it's planning, convening, or maybe even applying for funding, a whole lot easier. Ultimately, a tech economy assessment doesn't hand communities that silver bullet or magic formula. What it does do, it gives people the context, the confidence, the coordination they need to start making more informed decisions, whatever path they choose to take next. So, before we move on, let's take a quick step back to reflect on what an assessment really is. It's not just a static report, but more so a catalyst. It's going to clear that fog and build alignment, and it helps communities shift from that place of we should probably do something to we know what we're doing, and here's how we're going to get going and get started. And because it's grounded in both data and lived experience, it gives everyone from economic development leaders to local champions a shared foundation to act from. It builds momentum, it sets direction, and it brings structure to what often feels like a really messy or overwhelming challenge. But all of that can still sound theoretical. So now let's take a look at what this actually looks like in practice. So what we're going to do, we're going to share a couple of real-world examples of communities that have gone through this assessment process with us and used it to spark some measurable progress. So let's start off with a place that might be familiar to some of you up north, and that's Meadville in Pennsylvania. So Meadville, an absolutely wonderful community that I had the privilege of visiting actually this time last week, is a small city in northwestern Pennsylvania. It has a proud history really rooted in manufacturing, particularly tool and die work. But like many similar communities, it was facing some significant headwinds. Now, the local economy had become heavily dependent on these legacy industries that were increasingly vulnerable to automation. Young people were leaving in search of opportunity elsewhere. And despite having strong educational institutions and coupling that with a lot of community pride, there wasn't a clear or coordinated path towards tech-based economic growth. And that's where the assessment process came in. So 18 months ago, through the process, we worked with the Meadville team, anchored by 2 amazing members of faculty at Allegheny College, and supported equally by a handful of invested local industry leaders to identify some very real opportunities that were hiding in plain sight, particularly those around workforce development and tech entrepreneurship. And instead of trying to do everything at once, they focused on the places where they could build momentum quickly. And here's what happened as a result. So first, they secured funding and launched a brand new facility, the Allegheny Lab for Innovation and Creativity, or ALEC as it's lovingly referred to. We really loved getting to visit this space and seeing the incredible impact it's already having on the community. They had their ribbon cutting just 2 weeks ago. It was attended by over 300 people, including the Pennsylvania State Governor, Josh Shapiro. And this space serves as a multidisciplinary innovation hub that's equipped for digital design, fabrication, and emerging tech. And it's to be actively used by students, faculty, and the regional workforce as a whole. So it's hands-on, it's forward-looking, and it's very much community serving. So they also established a new nonprofit, the Meadville Community Revitalization Corporation, or MCRC. And this group has taken the lead on coordinating economic revitalization efforts with a focus not just on tech, but on quality of place. So they're putting Meadville on the map as a regional hub for retail and culture and community and entertainment. So absolutely incredible group. And then perhaps most importantly of all, the assessment process helped to spark a dynamic and cultural shift. So what used to be isolated efforts are now more part of a unified push. There's a stronger cross-sector collaboration with clearer communication and a shared focus on what the future could look like. So to think it all started with that one simple but powerful question, is this the right path for us? So today, it's very apparent that since our first meetings and interactions with the community, those 18 or so months ago, Meadville is now on a very different trajectory. And in fact, they've gone from exploring possibilities to building something very real. They're doing it with alignment, they're doing it with confidence, and they're doing it with this incredible growing momentum. So with that, I'm now going to hand it over to Diego to share another case study, and then he's going to talk about some community readiness.
Thanks, Nick. Another great example that really stands out to me from this work is Seward County, Nebraska. This community, like many rural communities, was seeing more and more of their young people leave after graduation, that famous brain drain. They were interested in growing their tech ecosystem as a way to retain talent and diversify their economy, but they weren't sure where to begin or what assets were already in place for them to leverage. I had the chance to work with them throughout the full process, from assessment to strategy to pilot. And I remember during the assessment, we helped surface real concrete data. How many tech jobs existed locally? Who was hiring? And what local talent looked like across multiple sectors. We also benchmarked them against the 8 key tech economy elements that Nick previously mentioned. And this, in turn, gave the local leaders a much clearer picture of where to start and helped shift the conversation from we think we know our community to we know our community. The insights from the assessment gave them the confidence and alignment that they needed to move into strategy development. One of the big opportunities that emerged was around student engagement. That's what led to the idea of organizing Seward's first ever student-led hackathon in partnership with their local university. I actually was there for that event, and it was incredibly inspiring and powerful. I saw students who didn't consider themselves as techie or tech-inclined students step up as leaders, as problem solvers and collaborators. I remember one student in particular, a young woman from a farm family, who pitched an idea to solve farm fires, a very real local issue. She had no tech background, but she had a clear vision and a strong willingness to solve this problem. She rallied a team of tech-inclined and tech-savvy folks and began working on building the prototype for her solution. And she ended up winning the entire event. That event stuck with me because it planted seeds of confidence and curiosity in young students who might not have otherwise never seen themselves joining the tech industry. That's the impact of an assessment. It created the clarity and alignment that made something like the hackathon possible, an idea that would have never taken off without first understanding the community's assets, gaps, and potential. So you might be wondering, are we ready for something like this? The good news is you don't need to have everything figured out to take the first step. In fact, most communities we work with are still asking big questions when they begin the process with us. What really matters is having a core group of leaders who are motivated and open to working together. So what does readiness look like? Here are a few key ingredients we typically look for. There needs to be cross-sector engagement. So folks from economic development corporations, people who are in the educational sector, local government, and even the private sector involved all at the table. There needs to be a willingness to have an openness to new ideas, communities that are ready to challenge the status quo and imagine new paths forward. There needs to be a group of trusted local champions. And I really want to emphasize that these don't have to be elected officials or people in power. In my experience, champions have been anywhere from K through 12 teachers to Chamber of Commerce staff to folks from utility companies, or even passionate community members who just want to see their community and want to contribute in making a difference. There also needs to be an ability to mobilize residents, especially since this work is needed to do outreach and community listening. There also needs to be clear priorities or at least a genuine desire to define them. And last but not least, there needs to be a shared vision, something that gets people nodding in agreement at the table. Readiness does not mean being fully built out. It means being committed, aligned, and willing to explore what's possible. That's more than enough to get started. So whether you're just beginning to explore this type of work or you're already developing new programs, the assessment is about aligning community vision with concrete action. And we're here to help communities make that leap, not with a one-size-fits-all model, but through a process that reflects your people, your assets, and your ambitions. Now, if the ideas you've heard today sparked something, or if you're simply curious to learn more about what this could look like in your community, we'd love to continue the conversation. You'll find our emails right there on the slide, so please feel free to reach out to any of us directly. We're happy to connect, hear about your story, and see what might be possible. And just to note, we have space to work with 1 or 2 communities in our next assessment cycle, which kicks off in July. If the timing feels right, we'd be glad to explore that with you. With that, I'll transition things over to our Q&A portion. Molly, Nick, feel free to jump in with your perspectives. And for those of you attending live, please drop any questions in the Q&A section. And we're excited to continue this conversation. I see multiple questions on the Q&A section, but I'll start off with one that really stood out during the registration. We got a lot of questions, and this one was mentioned multiple times. And the question was, what kind of physical and digital infrastructure is needed to support a tech ecosystem, a tech hub? And I'll let Molly answer that question.
Awesome. Thanks, Diego. And then we'll get into all the great ones that y'all have given us, and feel free to keep them coming. But for the infrastructure on the digital side, obviously reliable high-speed broadband is essentially non-negotiable as the foundation for everything from remote work and online learning to startup development and deploying digital products. Without it, tech-driven growth simply isn't sustainable or possible. So we just want to acknowledge broadband being a really key component to this work, and that being a critical place to begin if that's lacking in your community. Obviously, too, on the physical side, communities need spaces that spark collaboration and innovation. So we've mentioned a lot those co-working spaces, maker spaces, innovation hubs, incubators, whatever that sort of physical front door can be to enter into the local innovation and tech economy. And these are places, again, where entrepreneurs, students, adult learners, youth, creatives, all these types of folks can meet, build, grow ideas. These spaces don't have to be super flashy or expensive. You can start with a more minimum viable product space, maybe even an empty conference room in your office, but they do obviously need to be functional, inclusive, and designed for community use. And together, broadband and physical innovation spaces send that really clear message for this is a place where we can grow tech talent and entrepreneurship, and these things are really valued and important to us. Also, too, your co-working space or your hub could be that place that gets that high-speed internet first, and then the rest of the community begins to roll out and get access, but it can act as that sort of stopgap as the rest of the community waits and eventually gets access to broadband. Those spaces can be a nice first line of defense for that. But let's get into some of the other questions that we got in the chat. In particular, I'll go back to one of the ones about the data collection. It looks like we are having a little bit of some questions about our tools for data collection that we might be able to share, or if the data collection instrument is US specific or useful to anyone anywhere that wants to do this, given that technology means something different to different countries and different regions. I would just say that the data tool that we leverage in the assessment process is US data, because we currently just work with US communities sourced from public and private data sources from the US. This data is useful to anyone US based, but the underlying metrics are fairly universal, though every country may have their own different kinds of sources of data. If there is a census that happens in Tanzania and you can gather census data, for example, take that as a baseline, but also really digging into some of those qualitative and quantitative data sources. So like you said, you've been on the ground doing field work, hosting focus groups or roundtables where you're able to ask really targeted questions and build dialogue and then synthesize some of those insights that you hear verbally. It's another great way of starting to gather that data. And we do it where we kind of break out across different groups. So we want to interview or get a focus group of just entrepreneurs, or some communities call them listening sessions, where they just gather folks around a table, around some snacks, and just really get to the heart of what their needs are, what their gaps are, what their challenges are. So those are some examples of ways you might go about the data collection. I will also, and I will pass it to Nick or Diego to answer any, but one I just want to call out here, Chris Ferguson, a great question about, appreciating CORI mentioning that we're not trying to recreate Silicon Valley ecosystem. However, what are CORI's recommendations for vertical or market selection when building solutions and products? Would you say there are do's and don'ts based on the current startup landscape, and asking, since sincere mature ecosystems like Silicon Valley have such a high probability to outcompete rural ecosystems due to level of funding, talent, resources available, and the decades of lead time they have, and the millions of, federal dollars even that went in the early days to Silicon Valley, fun fact. So making it what it was and making your rural community what it can be. One thing I would say is that we intentionally focus on tech and the digital economy and SaaS or software startups, if possible, more than hardware or more than some of those really capital intensive products that can often be much harder to build in a small environment. However, we would say that just following where the industry trends are in your community, where are people already building and tinkering, what kinds of industries, technologies, and verticals organically exist, is there an opportunity to further leverage those? Yes, continue to explore that, but we caution communities to further down that path of putting all eggs in one basket, even from a startup perspective, right? Oh, we're going to build a super strictly dedicated to ag tech accelerator. Well, you might be missing out then on the full breadth of your community and population. Maybe some folks have ideas for a software startup, an ed tech startup, education technology, and just limiting to an ag tech focused vertical and an already very population limited community may not be the best strategy to really try to uncover every rock, right? And see what all the innovation opportunities are there. So we typically don't recommend that you would put all of your eggs in one vertical basket or create an industry-specific accelerator unless you have some really clear demand and use cases for that. It's better to start a little bit more broad, cast a wide net. Don't exclude members of your population because you don't really have the luxury of population density that major metro areas have. And just continue to follow and try to prioritize what community members are already building and what sorts of support they might need specifically to help scale and build up what they've got. But Nick or Diego, do you all want to add to anything to that? Or we can move on to Jim's question, what are typical critical gaps and how have others filled them? That might be a good one for you, Nick or Diego.
Sure.
You guys are unmuted.
Sure, I can jump on that. So that's a great question and something that the assessment really does help to uncover, because every community, our founder, Matt, will tell you, if once you've seen one rural community, you've seen one rural community. Every community is different. They have different strengths, weaknesses, assets, etc. And so figuring out what those gaps look like and the critical gaps, they can range. You know, a community might be broadband poor. It might be workforce poor. It might have a lack of resources for entrepreneurship. So that is the whole value of doing an assessment, is to figure out what those are so they can then be addressed in future moving strategy. I'd love to say, as we mentioned before, I'd love to say that there would be a generic playbook to say if you have broadband gaps, then these are the things you need to check off to fix the problem. But it's different for every community. So it's a great question, but something that really can only be uncovered through an assessment process.
Thanks, Nick. And Stacy asked a quick one that we can answer. Is there a minimum population where a tech economy might be viable? I will say we typically look for communities between 5,000 and 50,000 to engage in this work. And if you are a community of smaller than 5,000, it doesn't mean don't give it a shot. It just means we would encourage you to look more regionally and see if you can partner with some others in your community or in your broader region to create more of maybe a county-wide approach.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, you know, the power of rural really is its adaptability, your culture, your strengths, your institutions, what makes your community a strong one, and what makes your version of this viable and unique. You don't need, as Molly mentioned, you don't need to become the next tech hub or Silicon Valley. You just need to become a place where innovation has got space to grow in a way that strengthens, you know, your local community and heritage rather than just replacing it.
And we also got a sort of related question on that. How do we determine the level of assessment and planning? Is there an appropriate community size that provides the momentum? Do we look at village, town, or county level? And I'll pass that to Nick, but I'll also say it's somewhat of a choose your own adventure, in part because we really do want to meet your community where they are. So it can be a little bit of anything, but Nick, go ahead.
Yes, and I would agree. I would say yes to all of the above. We have worked with smaller communities of, you know, the 5,000 mark, all the way up to, we have just completed an assessment that was 26 counties within a state. So an assessment really is just, you know, grounding yourselves in where you currently stand, and whether you choose to do that as a single community or whether you choose to do that more regionally is completely up to you. Now, when you start using that information to move forward to the next step, which is building out a strategy, that might look different. You might, again, want to do something more regionally, or you might wish to divide this up into different pockets of work based on the assets and the tools and the resources that are available in each community that exists within that region. So yes, it can occur on either level there.
All right. One question I would say, or sorry, I got one from I think a friend, Valerie Lockhart, maybe, is, to your mind, does the AI tech integration happening in every industry change the T-bed model? If so, how? That's a huge question. We absolutely want to acknowledge how much AI is going to already is disrupting our world and our economy and our workforce and the startup landscape. And I would just say that absolutely we want to be really intentionally and closely watching all the signals and the indicators for your community. What are the industries sort of responding to based on AI? How are they responding? What are the startup landscapes looking like? We know it's a tougher time to raise capital for startups right now. So just really being very transparent about what are some of the local challenges and barriers right now, and then trying to understand what you do need to do from a workforce development standpoint to really stay competitive. From a startup training perspective, we are doing a lot of outreach on different AI agents and tools that we might be able to support our rural communities in using to help accelerate the startups that they're supporting. So we often act as that capacity builder or coach for a rural accelerator director who's then trying to best serve their startups. So helping those leaders really stay on trend and on edge and understand, what do I need to be doing? How do I need to be really completely changing the way I might teach product market fit or finding your validation as an entrepreneur? Those are the kinds of like real nuts and bolts that we absolutely want to acknowledge and get into, and still kind of look at it as a case-by-case basis, as every community across our country right now, I would say, is in a slightly different stage of awareness, adoption, acceptance of AI. But I think, watching this space in the next 5 years or so is going to be phenomenal. And we are absolutely here, buckled up and ready to keep watching it and keep evolving our approaches and our methodologies, as we're also learning from rural communities what they're seeing and what is and isn't working.
There is a question from Chris Ferguson. Would you ever recommend not building a tech ecosystem in a rural town or region? What would be examples that would inspire this decision? So that's a great question. I'll start it off and I'll let Nick or Molly jump in. But we typically don't recommend building a tech ecosystem in a rural region if there are other major underlying issues like water issues or really critical infrastructure gaps. We also don't recommend if the broadband coverage is not there yet, but we do have a broadband team that could help get there. So there are different solutions to whatever stage you are. It just depends on the type of stage that you are in and the type of service that we could provide. But Molly, Nick, any other perspectives?
Sure, I'll chime in on that. So I know, looking at the registration list, we have a number of people here from the economic development realm. And I know as well as you do that people in economic development tend to wear a lot of hats. They do a lot of work in the community under different umbrellas. Ecosystem building, especially when you're looking at building out a tech economy, is not something that a single individual can do. So even if you have a champion organization within the community that has a single person at the helm that says, I love this, I want to do it, let's implement it, it's not going to happen unless you have the capacity locally to support the work that you're doing. And that means invested local leadership that represent education, that represent entrepreneurship, that represent your small businesses, that represent all the different facets that you're trying to bring together. Because if you are trying to do this alone, it's simply not going to work. I say it's not going to work. It is incredibly difficult to make it happen. So yes, when you're looking at a community and looking at what one of the most important ingredients for this is outside of your broadband capacity, it's going to be making sure you have local leadership that can execute on this momentum.
And on that note, local leadership includes a variety of different folks from different backgrounds. It's not always the same sort of cookie cutter. We got to have this person and this person and this person from Chamber Economic Development. It's sometimes a really unique mix of individuals. But to Mickey's question about what challenge have you or others had in enlisting businesses and or industry partners who are based in local communities and development work groups, that's a really interesting one in that it really varies based on those kinds of personalities and motivations. So we've seen some communities, like Nick was mentioning, Meadville and others, where they've had a really powerful industry partner at the table, a private industry innovator who wants to see their community, develop more of a tech talent workforce because they know it will benefit them, and develop a, broader tax base and amenities, and they really get it. And then I've seen some other communities, for example, I won't say name exactly where, but a rural community that had a large meat packing and processing facility and a major industry, a major company there based doing all of their meat packing and processing, and a Fortune 500, but was entirely unwilling to come to the table with the economic developers, and just didn't really see the viability of a tech economy in that local community. And while that was really unfortunate, it wasn't going to stop those economic developers from carrying forth. It just meant that they had to prove a little bit more and try to find more creative ways, and then eventually hopefully come back to them and say, you know, we've built enough where this is a real thing. But in some cases it's just proof in the pudding, and other folks will not believe it or want to buy into it until you're already you know, 80% down the path.
All right.
So I also
Molly,
want to acknowledge John Patterson asked if there a fee for assessment. I would say yes, there is, but we also have in the past helped communities to find funding if you're not able to pay. So please do reach out and explore this with us in any case if it's of interest and resonating with you, because in many cases in communities where there's, you know, maybe a place-based philanthropic source that we have a connection to, or perhaps a state or regional grant we could help you find and apply for. We have deep expertise in helping communities identify and win the funding that fuels tech economy building. So that is something we're happy to do with you all.
Molly,
How
can I address a question here as well? I've seen in the list of questions that we got when all the attendees today registered that there were actually a number of questions that I'm just pulling up here regarding town development, especially as it pertains to youth and education. So we have how can we prepare students for the tech economy? How do we support schools? Let me see here. How do we encourage youth? I guess to an extent, what skills do rural leaders need? So to me, if you want a future-proof workforce, you really, as a community, you have to start planting the seeds early. So that doesn't just mean coding classes in high school, though that can really help. It means creating exposure and relevance to what this means. So students need to see people like them working in tech jobs and using digital tools and launching new ideas. And that visibility helps to almost normalize tech as an option. And rural leaders don't need to become computer scientists or computer science experts. What they need to be is bridge builders. And the reason I say that is because really the most impactful leaders are those who connect schools to employers, or adults to reskilling pathways, or young people to mentors. So this isn't just a talent issue, it's more of a cultural shift, and it has to start by making tech feel familiar and achievable and worth sticking around for. So there's many different ways you can do that, but yeah, definitely start planting those seeds early and engaging the youth.
On that note too, a little bit more of a grown-up youth, but we had a question in the chat actually from Readiness, our friend from Tanzania. Do we involve university graduate researchers in on this process? It depends again on the community and the personalities. Each one is different. My colleagues are going to kill me, but we do have a saying here at CORI. I gotta say it, y'all. Once you've seen one rural community, you've seen one rural community. They're all different. Every single one has their own unique blends of personalities, hopes, dreams, things that we've tried, been there, done that, yada, yada. But the university angle, to answer your question, I've seen a really cool community I met with recently, a really cool approach where they were taking some of their graduate students in research and actually involving them in their own community sort of initial data-driven collection process, where they were having those grad students who are experts in qualitative and quantitative research put together a survey, because they know really, you know, what are the things we should look at and what do we want to do for our local community, and kind of doing that pre-assessment data collection by involving some of the students and helping them create a little project. In this case, it was their thesis of what sort of indicators and elements should our community look at for building an innovation ecosystem. So in some ways you can really bring the bring the question home and rally some youth or just excited minds about how this can apply in your local context.
Looks like we've got time maybe just for one more quick question. So there's a couple in the chat from Jim. Any tips for dealing with resistance to change? And then follow up with other than engagement and involvement. And yes, Jim, there are, and these are usually identified during the strategy phase. So once you are grounded with the data and the information you need to move forwards, one of the things that's often uncovered in strategy is building a compelling story that is shareable, that is relatable, and drives impact within the community. You know, our communities are full of, you can call them NIMBYs, or you can call them, you know, cave people, you know, citizens against virtually everything. But either way, it's an educational thing. If you can create a compelling message that explains the whys behind what makes this important, such as automation isn't just going to eliminate jobs, it's actually going to create jobs, and build that compelling and impactful story, we can often, most times, circumnavigate resistance to change. But that's a great question, and we see it everywhere, so don't worry if that's happening locally.
Absolutely. I think it's a fun quote about innovation, though of course community buy-in is critical, but Henry Ford is I guess alleged to have said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So if you think about building truly something that the community needs, that the future of your, you know, rural residents are going to benefit from, thinking about, of course, there may be some resistance at first and some, you know, questions, confusion, but bringing folks along, having, you know, open houses, networking sessions, Q&As, community meetings, places where people can gather and ask questions and have opportunities to get in on it, right? So it's not just a couple economic developers in a locked room, but it truly is an effort that involves the breadth of your community so that folks do feel like there's a role for them, regardless of their background, no computer science degree necessary. The tech and innovation economy is truly for everyone. And I think that's the message we want to leave y'all with at time. So thank you so much for showing up today. We really appreciate all the questions and great dialogue. We would love to continue the conversation with all of y'all. So please do reach out. You've got our emails, and thank you for doing the work, for showing up, for believing that, you know, transformation in rural America is possible, and that your residents and the folks who call rural home are truly capable and able to thrive in the tech economy. We believe it. We are grateful that y'all do too. Have a good one. Thanks, everyone.